Hi, I'm Femi OK. You're watching The Stream. It's been more than a decade since the website WikiLeaks released hundreds of thousands of classified documents. Some of those documents contain details of potential US war crimes. Now the WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, has one last opportunity to appeal a UK court ruling that could mean that he would be extradited to the United States. Joining our show today to talk about that, we have Stella Morris and Rebecca Vincent. Ladies, it's good to have you here with us. Stella, please tell our audience who you are and what you do. Go ahead. And we'll come back and talk to Rebecca. We're just connecting Stella with the audio there. Rebecca, please introduce yourself to our global audience.
Hi, Femi. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Rebecca Vincent. I'm the Director of International Campaigns for Reporters Without Borders. We are one of the leading press freedom organizations campaigning for the release of Julian Assange and have been the only NGO to monitor the entire extradition proceedings here in London.
And Stella Morris is the partner of Julian Assange. We'll hear more from Stella in a moment, just settling with the audio. But I want to give you an opportunity to talk to Stella and Rebecca on YouTube. So you can do that. The comment section is live, be part of today's show. So I'm going to remind you what has been happening in the last decade. I'm going to look at a timeline just to jog you with some key points that we need to remember. So let's start in about 2010 to 2011. That was when WikiLeaks released classified information from governments around the world. In 2019, the Trump administration indicts Assange on hacking and Espionage Act charges. And then in December 2021, so just last December, the UK High Court says that Assange can be extradited to the United States. Rebecca, I am wondering, in this over a decade of attention on Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, what has changed?
Well, the entire climate for journalism has changed. That's for starters. I think it's very clear now to everybody around the world the danger that this precedent could set for journalism, for press freedom. The persecution of Julian Assange has already had a chilling effect on journalism. We will never know what stories have already been censored or self-censored as a result of his targeting. But what happens next will be really important, and it will set a precedent that will impact the future of journalism around the world for many years to come.
Rebecca, as you know, there's a lot of activism and support for Julian Assange online. I'm just going to go to this tweet here in response to our show today. I have been following that is the Julian Assange WikiLeaks case. I'm shocked at the blatant disregard for rule of law and proper process in this case. It's hard to understand why multiple UN member states aren't speaking out against the blatant disregard for democratic processes and human rights. Rebecca.
Indeed, there is not enough action by states themselves to raise this with their counterparts in the US government and in the UK government. These are the countries at the epicenter of this. But we have to look at why. What is really at stake here is a broader question. It's should states be able to hold information as classified? The leak in question was the biggest in history. Hundreds of thousands of diplomatic cables and military documents were leaked. We believe at Reporters Without Borders that this was in the public interest. We believe that Julian Assange was targeted for this contribution to journalism because these leaked documents informed scores of public interest reporting around the world. We all know more about war crimes, about human rights abuses, other illegal acts that were committed. None of these acts have ever been persecuted. It's only the publisher being pursued here. This is a very dangerous precedent again, and the US Espionage Act lacks a public interest defense. So if he is extradited to the US and prosecuted there, Julian Assange cannot adequately defend himself because, again, this was because he acted in the public interest. But this, too, could be applied to any publisher, any source, any journalist around the world. This is not only about Julian Assange.
Let's talk about options. What happens next? So I'm going to bring in Professor Jeff Gilbert. He has an academic view of the series of events that happen before Julian Assange could be extradited. It's an academic view. Rebecca, as soon as he's finished the video, I want you to tell me what the reality is. Here's the professor.
Julian Assange's extradition to the United States depends on courts in the UK finding that he can be extradited, and then the Home Secretary agrees to his surrender. Even after that, he could apply to the European Court of Human Rights on the basis that his rights under the ECHR would be violated if he were to be surrendered. Those rights might be relating to fair trial, health, freedom of expression.
Rebecca, there's still another opportunity.
There is, so we'll have to see. There is. So at the moment, we're waiting to see if the UK Supreme Court will agree to review the case. This is not a given, so it is a question. I hope that they do. I think that this deserves to be heard by another court here in the UK, and more broadly than simply the narrow grounds that the High Court was able to consider. The High Court was only able to look at the conditions of Julian Assange's mental health and the US prison system, because that was the basis of the first instance court barring extradition. And it is correct that he would have recourse to the European Court of Human Rights at some point. I would be surprised if one day we don't have a strong ruling from Strasbourg in this case. But I don't believe that process would prohibit extradition. That is likely to be years down the line. So there is a real concern that we could see rapid movement if the Supreme Court does not review this case. There is a chance that he could be extradited in the coming months. It will possibly be sent back to the Home Secretary. It's worth bearing in mind that it was the UK Home Office that took a political decision in the first place. In 2019, it was a different Home Secretary, but it was the same office, decided to greenlight the US extradition request. That's why this became a matter before the courts at all. The UK could have at the time taken a decision in the interest of press freedom and journalism and simply denied the request. Instead, we then went through nearly 2 years of extradition proceedings, and we're now back in an almost circular way to a situation where it might go back to the very governmental body responsible for this political decision in the first place, which is pretty appalling.
Let me bring in Stella. Stella, thanks for your patience. It's good to have you joining us. I remember a tweet that you posted, and it was just the beginning of December. I'm going to share it with our audience. Julian Assange has a stroke in Belmarsh prison, fiancé reveals. This is as you're going through all of these various legal steps that Rebecca's been describing. How is he today?
Well, he's fighting, but he's struggling because he's been in Belmarsh prison, which is the harshest prison in the UK, since the 11th of April 2019 when he was arrested. He was already in a deteriorated state of health. He's in, isolation while he's in prison. His health has deteriorated further, and he had a stroke in October. You know, his incarceration could kill him, and the stroke is a real moment of alarm because it can just be the precursor to a much more devastating stroke. Julian has been persecuted for years and years, and that has an effect not just on him mentally, but also on him physically. He was in the Ecuadorian embassy for 7 years for no reason at all because the U.S. had opened an investigation, hadn't brought charges, but was behind the scenes moving the political atmosphere around the situation. So it's been a political case from the beginning, and Julian is suffering, and they're grinding him. They're trying to grind him to dust through the process. He was first arrested on the 7th of December 2010, and he hasn't been free since. And he's been going through progressive states of incarceration and detention. And now he's been in Belmarsh prison. He's not charged in this country. He's not convicted of any crime. And he's been there for almost 3 years.
So I'm just wondering about your family life. At the top of your Twitter profile, there is a banner with the youngsters, and then the Twitter profile picture is you and Julian. How do you maintain a family life?
Well, we're a family, like any other, except we're forced to be apart. Julian sees his two sons in Belmarsh prison whenever they can visit, which is basically on a weekly basis now. Mm-hmm. And when we're together as a family, as a normal family. He, reads them stories. They sit on his lap. we play games. But this is in the context of Belmarsh High Security Prison with cameras out everywhere and, very harsh security measures going in. It's like airport security, but times 1,000. They check inside your mouth, behind your ears. They pat you down several times. It's very, very kind of intimidating and a harsh environment for the children to have to go through to see their father.
I'm just going to say that last picture, which was Christmas time with your little ones and their granddad, because Julian's dad looks really like Julian. So I don't want anyone to think, oh, they let him out for Christmas. No, they did not. Let's talk about this campaign, an ongoing campaign that you are part of, Rebecca is part of, many people around the world are part of. How is that going? Because what you're trying to do is, tell us.
Well, we're trying to draw attention to the core of what this is about, because, I think of Julian's case as an onion. At the core, it is a completely preposterous legal case, a political persecution. If people really understand what it's about, everyone will be completely alarmed and disgusted by his treatment. The problem is that a lot of layers of obfuscation have been created around that core. And so people think they have to understand these layers, but they just have to understand the core of the case. And I think we've been making enormous progress in every free press organization, human rights organization, every major human rights organization, the UN. Today, the CPJ put out a report, and they put Julian's case center stage of where the Biden administration is failing on the press freedom front, that it's giving authoritarians everywhere comfort because they can use basically the Assange model to go after journalists everywhere. And it's creating a new standard, a race to the bottom, where you can persecute dissidents or journalists who publish things that make the powerful unhappy, and then they can abuse the law, which is what is happening in this case. They're abusing the courts, they're abusing the law in order to persecute an innocent man. Okay. And, there are so many aspects to this case, and I just want to bring in one that came out recently. The CIA, while under the directorship of Pompeo, were planning to assassinate Julian in London. There's a long report about this that came out a few months ago.
Stella, how did you find that out? Because that's outrageous.
Well, it was a long investigation. It took the reporters, 3 national security reporters, months and months to get the story. It's a 7,500-word investigation with over 30 sources who are part of the Trump administration, very senior sources. Some are named part of the national security government, part of the government under the Trump administration, and they confirmed that Julian's assassination was being discussed at the highest levels of government, that Pompeo, while he was head of the CIA, was directing his agents to come up with sketches and options about how to carry out his execution in London. And this is when I'm talking about the core. How can it be that this is even in the UK courts? How can the courts even be considering extraditing Julian to the country that plotted to kill him?
Right, that is a really good question. It's a question that has been brought up from one of our followers who've been following this conversation. Let me just show it to you here on Twitter. I'm going to put this to you, Rebecca. The West has always championed itself as a free nation, but this case has proven otherwise. Why is it that no country in the name of human rights in the West have tried to help or offer asylum to Julian Assange? Is that true? And then just to unpack that idea that the West is not supportive of Julian Assange avoiding being extradited to the United States. Rebecca.
I wouldn't say the entire West. I think there is stronger support in some states than others, but I think many other governments have been a bit cowardly in raising this, again, with the US and the UK, the countries that are responsible for the current situation. But this is exactly the problem with this case, when even the standard setters, the states that have considered themselves even as being committed to human rights, to free expression, to press freedom, when these states aren't getting it right, it sets a very worrying precedent and it undermines the moral authority of the US government, the UK government, to raise these sorts of cases abroad. As long as Julian Assange continues to be targeted in this way, this will be a thorn in the side of the Biden administration or any subsequent administration and any other efforts to promote media freedom around the world. So that is why our single most important advocacy call now at Reporters Without Borders is on the Biden administration to drop these charges, to close this case, to stop this more than decade-long persecution of Julian Assange. Put this to bed once and for all. That is in their power. At no point is this inevitable. They could stop this at any point, and we think it is well past time for them to do so.
I want to bring in a voice that's going to give some pushback to you, Rebecca, and to you, Stella, as well. I'm going to play the video for you, Stella, and then immediately respond to Brian Stewart, who's a political writer. This is what he told us earlier.
Assange is no journalist. He is no hero. He fell afoul U.S. authorities on account of his theft of official secrets, whose dissemination gravely harmed U.S. interest, and endangered valiant Afghans fighting against theocratic tyranny. If Assange's lawbreaking cannot be duly punished, it implies that governments have no right to secrecy. This foolish standard would imperil the national security of all free nations, subverting the foundation of law itself.
Well, first of all, dispel the claim that anyone was harmed. The U.S. has been pushing this talking point since day one, but when they've been under oath in the Chelsea Manning court-martial, they've had to admit that they have found no single person who has ever come to harm as a result of these publications. So it's basically an attack point, and a vague one, and one that is false, that is used to try to undermine support and, again, take attention away from what this case does, which is to criminalize journalism. Julian is not a U.S. citizen. He does not owe any oath of allegiance to the United States. He hasn't sworn any secrecy to the United States. When crimes are committed by the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan, he has no obligation to keep those crimes secret. In fact, those crimes ought to be prosecuted by the United States, and it is in the public interest for those things to be published, even if they are classified. And war crimes will always be, if they are covered up, they will always be classified. So the question is, does the public have the right to know when states commit grave crimes, when they commit murder, when they assassinate civilians, and so on? And if you're not free to publish that information, then we have no press freedom, and then we are no longer living in a democracy.
Stella, can I just ask you, is there no situation where there should be information that should be classified? The government should not have that ability to say, this is not for the public's consumption?
Well, I mean, of course, Julian's already answered this question many times, that there is legitimate information that states can hold secret, but when we're talking about states committing crimes, and this is the material that Julian is indicted over, then the state has no prerogative. And the fact is that the U.S. has a serious problem of overclassification of information. They classify, and this is even insiders say, that they're using classification as a way to shield themselves from criticism.
And this is exactly...
Yes,
sorry,
Rebecca.
Femi.
No, you, Rebecca, you go first.
Just to add to that, this is why it's so important, this point about the public interest defense, because it is precisely that a reasonable court would apply to any case such as this. Was this done in the public interest? But the fact that the Espionage Act has no public interest defense means that these kind of cases could proliferate. And it's not only the US that has that type of legislation. Here in the UK, our official secrets acts also lack a public interest defense. So the same type of case could be brought here. That's why it's been possible for Assange to be pursued in this way. And we call not only for the case against him to be dropped, but for the legislation that has allowed for this case to be opened to be amended. The Espionage Act needs a public interest defense, and all relevant legislation around the world does as well.
I'm just going to go to YouTube because there's some curiosity about public opinion in the UK about Julian Assange's case. Is it in the papers? Is it on the radio? Is it in the news? Do people care, Stella? I
think they care more and more. And in fact, I think the papers have been covering the case increasingly. They're starting to understand how the implications of this case for them, because Julian's case is going through the UK courts, and that means the UK courts are making determinations about how the equivalent of the Espionage Act, the Official Secrets Act, operates in this country. And these are questions that haven't really been tested, and they're being forced to be tested through Julian's case. Could someone in the UK be tried for publishing information that was true, that was factual, in the same way that Julian is? And so far, the answer has been yes, and this is truly alarming. So I think that at the editorial level, this is increasingly understood. Of course, I think the broadcast media could be doing more. I think there's still a lot of failure to understand what's at stake. There should be more consideration, like more attention to what the experts in the field of press freedom are saying, because I think there's not a proper understanding of the implications in the UK.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because earlier we spoke to Dr. Deepa Driver, who talks about the impact if Julian Assange is extradited to the United States, what that means for journalists around the world. Here's Dr. Driver.
It is really important that we recognize that this is a highly dangerous precedent, because it allows any authoritarian regime to use both legal and illegal processes to rendict or extradite anyone who is critical of their behavior overseas, even if they are not citizens of that regime. And this, of course, creates a huge problem for anybody concerned about crimes in any walk of life, whether it's the environment, whether it is politics, whether it is war, whether it is torture, etc., etc.
Rebecca, what's the strength of your case, the appeal against Julian Assange being extradited, because it will have an impact on journalism around the world?
I think the public understands that appeal, but so far that hasn't had much bearing in the current legal proceedings in the UK. The High Court, the District Court, and then the High Court did not give any credence to the idea of this as a political case. But I think people can see it for what it is. It's certainly the view of many press freedom organizations. It's certainly the view of a number of really credible media outlets around the world that this case is on the basis of political charges, that he is being targeted in connection with journalism. So that is understood. Unfortunately, I think that's very unlikely to be considered in the US. If Julian Assange is extradited there, if he faces legal proceedings there, we can't expect that court to treat it as such, because they're proceeding as if he is a serious criminal, which we do not believe that he is. So here we have a bit of a gap between common sense and public understanding here, and what these states are trying to get away with.
I want to end with one more thought, which is, how do you think Julian Assange's appeal will end? On Twitter, Amelia shared this with us. I think it will end with extradition if we aren't able to break this wall of silence by Western politicians, diplomats and decision makers. And then Anthony Bellinger sent us this video, which was pretty pessimistic. Let's take a look.
I'm very pessimistic about what will happen, and I fear that he will be extradited to the United States. Extradition would probably mean the worst is death, because, as you know, his health is very fragile, and this would be one of the worst news for press freedom in the world in recent decades.
Stella Morris and Rebecca Vincent, it's been really good to have you on the show today. Behind you, Stella, is a little picture of you and Julian in the last sort of 30 seconds of this show. So very quickly, when do you think you two will be living together free? Go ahead. When's that going to happen?
I think it's going to happen soon. I mean, I can't see this going on. If Julian loses this case, then the rest of our liberties go with it. So
okay.
I'm not as pessimistic as Anthony Bellinger. I think we're gaining a lot of momentum, and that this is just...
Thank you.
As long as people know what's going on, we can win this.
Stella Morris, Rebecca Vincent, thank you for being part of the stream today. Appreciate you. Take care, everybody. I'll see you next time.